On Monday 11th of May, 25 members and friends of the Slinfold Horticultural Society left Slinfold at 5 a.m. to journey to France to Monet's and other gardens around Paris. Once again, we crossed the Channel on the shuttle.
And you won't get wet feet. I can assure you that. You're 44 metres below the surface, below the sea bed, should I say, when we go through. If you see water, tell somebody because... Obviously.
It is a bit like going on road to
You can walk out if you want to, or walk around. Because you've got a funny notion if you stay. You can approach gently to train if you want. Bring the shutters down in between. Give her a loo.
Oh, is there a loo down?
Yes.
You're in between.
Right, now you're on this blooming thing. If you're a smoker, I'm afraid you're not allowed to smoke on here. And if you want to take a photograph, you mustn't use a flash camera because it mucks up the security systems. The train stops in the middle of the tunnel, we end up walking one way or the other. So, please, if you're going to use a camera, switch the flash off.
We arrived at the Hotel Blue Marine, Milan, at 5 p.m. By this time, it had become very warm, and we were able to enjoy dinner on the terrace of the hotel. The following morning was fine and warm, and there was time for a sit or stroll around the hotel. The coach arrived to take us on our first visit, the Chateau and Garden of Courance, 50 kilometres south of Paris. The chateau is set in a splendid park à la Francais, believed to have been designed by André Lenotre. Famous for its many springs of fresh bubbling water, the park is a symphony of stone, trees, grass and water. There are statues, colonnades, benches and boulders, all made of the local grey limestone. The main house, the low wing on the right, and the two little pavilions were built in the 17th century. The architect was Gilles Le Breton. The style is typically Louis XIII, with brick and stone, with slate roofs.
Arabesque.
Okay, that little thing laid out by Lenotre, who was later designing the garden at the Versailles, also where we're going later as well. That sort of lace work with the little bushes. Old French, courage means running water.
Donc dans ce parc, vous n'avez que des eaux de source.
All you have in this park is
50
spring
feet
water.
wide.
Et dans ce parc, on a retrouvé 10 sources pour 17 pieds d'eau.
10 springs and 17
A monumental staircase was added at a later period and is a copy of the one at Fontainebleau. The ivy-covered part on the right was added in the last century to link the big house to the wing.
Cheese. Cheese. Ah, thank you.
A short walk through the grounds brings us to the Anglo-Japanese garden, featuring many rare and interesting trees, shrubs and flowers. Some of our party take a rest before continuing past the horseshoe-shaped stretch of water called the Feu à Cheval. And to the large lake where the reflection of the house can be seen in the still water. After some refreshment and a photo call, we travel on to the Château de Vaux-le-Vicomte. The chateau is really the achievement of one man, Nicolas Fouquet. It took 5 years to build the chateau on a small manorial estate purchased in 1641, where two small valleys converged. 500 hectares of land was cleared, raising the old chateau as well as the village of Vaux and two nearby hamlets. The buildings, gardens and waterfalls were laid out along an axis measuring 2 miles from north to south. On a tour of the interior, we come to Fouquet's bedroom. This is the room where Fouquet slept before his arrest and imprisonment on charges of misappropriating public funds in his position of Chancellor of the Exchequer in 1661. The tapestries on the walls depict the months of the year. Madame Fouquet's private room, only the lower wainscoting is original to this room. This is Louis XV's dressing room, and this is his bedroom with a tester bed by Leray. The Praslin bedroom shows the trend towards small bedrooms, which was created by the Praslin family around 1780. The Grand Saloon is an oval room 18 metres long by 18 metres high. The large square room, the original purpose of this room is unknown, but it was used at one time for billiards, hence the presence of the extra large billiard table. The large pictures feature the victories of Field Marshal de Villars. The Chambre des Muses owes its name to 9 muses adorning the coving and ceiling, regarded as one of the masterpieces of Charles Le Brun. A central motif of the ceiling depicts the triumph of fidelity. The Cabinet des Jeux, a cheerful little room, was turned into a library in the 18th century. and its Italianate covings are outstanding. The King's bedroom. Although no French king ever slept here, there was a tradition of keeping a suite of rooms for a possible visit from the king. Such rooms were richly decorated, as here in the Baroque style. The dining room. As the idea of setting aside a room for meals dates from the mid-17th century in France, Fouquet was innovative in creating a dining room. It is complemented by the serving area, a vaulted room behind the arcade. Flowers and fruit are depicted with trophies of war and peace. The large kitchen at Vaux has been in almost uninterrupted use since Fouquet's time. It was refitted in 1875 and used daily until 1956. And so to the gardens. The landscaping of the site was probably started in 1641, when Fouquet purchased the estate. Le Notre arrived in 1653, became head gardener, and was responsible for the final harmony of the parterres and fountains. Following morning we visited the renowned chateau of Fontainebleau. The medieval chateau that existed on this site was pulled down and rebuilt in 1528. Many of the kings who used it as a residence made modifications and additions to the building, and the interior still owes a great deal to Napoleon. Entry to the chateau took us past a backlit stained glass window and through a gallery containing some fine paintings. Beyond this, we enter the gallery of plates, created under Louis Philippe. The originality and fame of this room are due to the plates now fitted into the boiseries. They show the history of Fontainebleau and were made in the Sèvres factory between 1838 and 1844. The Trinity Chapel on the site of the old abbey founded by St. Louis in 1259. The present building dates from the beginning of the 17th century. The paintings on the vaults being the work of Martin Freminet. Gallery of Francis I. This Renaissance-style gallery is one of the most celebrated in Fontainebleau. The decoration was directed by Rosso, an admirer of Michelangelo, about 1534. The decoration contains a complexity of images. In one panel, the king is shown as an elephant, a symbol of wisdom. The King's Guard Room. The urn celebrates the glory of Leonardo da Vinci and Jean Goujon. It's Sèvres, 1832. This room was the first of the King's apartments where the bodyguard stood when the King resided at Fontainebleau. The ballroom, started under Francis I, was unfinished at the King's death and taken up by Philibert Delorme. The design of the ceilings was repeated in the floor, presently covered during restoration work. Above the musicians' gallery, a picture shows a concert. The King's Staircase. Under Francis I, the room was a chamber for the King's favourite Duchess, a wall of which was decorated for her, showing episodes in the life of Alfred the Great, among female stucco figures. In 1748, Louis XV had the staircase built to improve the access to his great apartment. We pass through this small anteroom which has this rather fine domed ceiling. King's Antechambers. This antechamber is in the big old tower of the stronghold and was used as a bedroom and then as an antechamber where the king ate. Furniture dates from the time of Napoleon III. King's Cabinet. Until 1737, the sovereign used this room for all his official business. The room subsequently became a second antechamber. Francis I's drawing room. This large room was the Queen's bedchamber at the time of Francis I and subsequently became an antechamber. It was here under the old regime that the sovereigns dined in public when the Queen was at Fontainebleau. The vase has as its stand decorated with pelicans, the Queen's emblem. The Tapestries drawing room. The decoration in this room dates from 1835 and includes a ceiling of Scotch fir. On the pedestal table, an enamel cup is by Sèvres. The Gallery of Diana. This gallery was erected by Henry IV in 1600. In 1859, Napoleon III installed the Palace Library in the gallery. The great urns are by Sèvres. Decoration is dedicated to the myth of Diana. The Queen's bedchamber. Since the beginning of the 17th century, all the queens of France slept here. Queen Marie Antoinette had the gilded Duchess bed made in 1787. The throne room. Originally the king's bedchamber, all the sovereigns slept here from Henry IV to Louis XVI. Then Napoleon converted it into a throne room in 1808. The council chamber. For some time this was the private room for the king before it became the Grand Cabinet in 1737. The furniture in the room was ordered by Napoleon. Napoleon's bedchamber. Napoleon used this first as a writing room until 1807 and then as his grand bedchamber. Napoleon's small bedchamber. This became Napoleon's writing room in 1808, and in 1811 he had the camp bed installed so that he could rest there easily. The great desk was also used by Napoleon. We now have a second opportunity to look at Trinity Chapel, this time from the ground floor. The picture above the altar shows the Holy Trinity and dates from 1642. Leaving the interior, we walked through to the court of the fountain on the border of the lake.
Something like that. You've got that beautiful staircase. Oh.
From here we come to the top of the Grand Parterre. Louis XIV had the gardens remade by Le Notre. Leaving the parterre, we return to the White Horse Court, which is now the main entrance to the palace. The Grand Horseshoe Staircase was created in 1634. We leave Fontainebleau with a view of the Garden of Diana. In the afternoon we travelled on to the Chateau of Versailles. It is the indelible image of an all-powerful and glorious monarchy and one of the most prized treasures of France's democratic republic. Versailles was conceived by Louis XIV, who had the highest idea of what a monarchy should be. His successors worked to perfect his grand design. Entering from the street, we reach the marble court with its clock of 1679. From here we made a tour of some of the extensive gardens. André Le Notre was commissioned by Louis XIV to redesign the gardens in 1662, based on what the king had seen and admired of his work at Vaux-le-Vicomte. With over 300 statues and vases of marble, lead and bronze, the gardens constitute the largest and finest open-air museum of 18th century sculpture in the world. Although we had insufficient time to look at the inside of the chateau, an idea of its magnificence can be gleaned from a few slides taken on a previous visit. The Royal Chapel started in 1689, a mixture of Gothic and French classical style, is a rare example of a French church with a painted ceiling. The long gallery known as the Hall of Mirrors was begun in 1678. The light streams through the tall windows and is reflected by the large mirrors that run the length of the hall. And finally, the Museum of the History of France, in paintings and sculptures introduced by King Louis Philippe. Back at the hotel that evening, it was warm enough for some of us to have dinner on the terrace.
Oh, come on, don't do that. Arlene does that. What's Yvonne's doing? You've got David Bailey behind you. And,
Who's David?
oh,
It's not Ron. It's not Ron, I trust,
Ron
is it?
David.
We can show you.
She's got one. She's got
Well,
one.
I've never seen that. I don't remember.
I've got one in the bedroom. You must remember.
Really? Well, do you mind?
Then you have a secret, isn't it?
Following day, we left our hotel to travel to Rouen, stopping at Giverny to visit Monet's garden. Unfortunately, we arrived in a thunderstorm and the rain lasted for most of our visit. The gift shop did a roaring trade in rain capes and was a convenient shelter from the weather. Monet, the Impressionist painter, lived in Giverny from 1883 until his death in 1926. His son Michel inherited the property, but allowed the house to decay into ruins, and the garden became a jungle overrun by river rats. Michel died in 1966 and left the estate to the Académie des Beaux-Arts. In 1977, Gerald Van Kemp, who restored Versailles, decided to work in Giverny. American benefactors were responsible for funding much of the restoration. Despite the rain, we managed to see most of the garden, which was colourful with many late spring flowers and bulbs in bloom. In the water garden, the wisteria was probably at its best, adorning the famous Japanese bridge. Our hotel for that night was the Clarine on the outskirts of Rouen. After breakfast we boarded the coach and drove into Rouen for a quick look at the cathedral and part of the old city. Rouen is known as the city of 100 spires, but the most famous is that of the magnificent Cathedral Notre Dame, one of the masterpieces of French Gothic architecture. The west facade was painted by Monet in Cathedrals of Rouen series. This flight of stairs is known as the bookseller's staircase. The 250-foot iron steeple, known as the Batter Tower, was added in the 15th and 16th centuries. On our return journey, we stopped at Boulogne for lunch. And then on to Calais for our return to England on Le Shuttle. Once again, a very enjoyable trip.